My parents disowned me at my sister's rehearsal dinner, announcing it to everyone we knew. They blamed me for ruining my sister's life in a car crash when I was singing. She destroyed Jane's future, Mom told the crowd. She's dead to us. I stayed quiet, then asked one question that made everyone turn to stare at her instead. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the Waterford Estate, one of those venues with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lake that looked too perfect to be real. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed wooden beams, and white roses covered every available surface. My sister Jane had outdone herself, which surprised nobody who knew her. She'd always been meticulous about appearances. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the navy dress Jane had approved 3 weeks earlier. The parking lot was already full, and I could see guests mingling through the windows as I walked toward the entrance. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed broken glass, but I kept my face neutral. I'd gotten good at that over the years. The approval process for the dress had been typical of every interaction I'd had with Jane since the accident. She'd sent me a text with 3 options, all in muted colors that wouldn't draw attention: navy charcoal or taupe. Nothing bright, nothing that might pull focus from her or the wedding party. I'd chosen navy because it was the least depressing, and she'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji. No words, just acknowledgement that I'd made an acceptable choice. I'd spent $400 on that dress, more than I'd ever spent on a single piece of clothing. It fit perfectly tailored at a boutique in downtown Detroit by a seamstress who'd asked about the occasion. When I told her it was for my sister's wedding, she'd smiled and said how exciting that must be. I'd smiled back and said nothing about the knot of dread that had been growing in my chest since the invitation arrived. The invitation itself had been a surprise. I'd assumed I wouldn't be invited at all. Jane and I hadn't spoken directly in almost 2 years. Our last conversation had been at Dad's birthday dinner, where she'd asked me to pass the salt, and I complied. That was it. Pass the salt. 20 seconds of interaction that counted as communication in our family. But the invitation came addressed to just me, Miss Lillian Lawhorn. No +1, no guest, just my name in elegant calligraphy on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than I spent on groceries in a week. The accident happened when I was 17. Jane was 19, home from college for the summer. We'd gone to a party at Ashley Morrison's house, one of those end-of-summer gatherings that felt important at the time. Jane had been drinking. She handed me the keys to her car around midnight, laughing as she collapsed into the passenger seat. I was sober. I'd never touched alcohol that night. The intersection was dark. The light was green and the truck ran the red light at 60 mph. The impact shattered Jane's femur, crushed her pelvis, and left her with permanent nerve damage in her left leg. The doctor said she'd walk again, but dancing was over. Her scholarship to Juilliard disappeared along with her future in ballet. Nobody asked what color the light was. Nobody asked if I was sober. Mom found Jane's hospital bracelet with the blood alcohol content report and decided that was the only truth that mattered. The fact that I was driving made me responsible for everything that followed. Jane's blood alcohol content was 0.08. The hospital had tested her as part of standard trauma protocol. When Mom saw that number on the discharge papers days later, something in her face changed. She looked at me across Jane's hospital room, where I'd been sitting vigil, and I saw the exact moment she decided whose fault this was. "You let her drink," Mom said. Her voice was low and venomous. "You were supposed to be responsible. She's 19 years old. She shouldn't have been drinking at all." I was responsible, I protested. I didn't drink anything. I drove her home safely. The other driver, "Don't you dare blame someone else," Mom snapped. "You were behind the wheel. You were in control of that car. Jane trusted you, and look what happened." Dad had tried to intervene. "Honey, the police report says." "I don't care what this police report says," Mom cut him off. "My daughter's life is over. Her scholarship is gone. Her dreams are destroyed." And it happened while Lillian was driving. The logic was insane. But grief doesn't operate on logic. Mom needed someone to blame, someone she could control and punish. The drunk driver was a stranger already being processed through the legal system. His insurance was paying the medical bills. There was nothing Mom could do to him that would satisfy the rage and pain she felt watching Jane suffer. But I was right there, 17, scared, desperate for her approval and forgiveness. An easy target. The next few months were a blur of hospital visits, physical therapy appointments, and crushing silence. Jane's surgery had been successful in stabilizing her pelvis, but the nerve damage in her leg was permanent. She would walk again. The doctors were clear about that, but the precise muscle control required for professional ballet was gone. The letter from Juilliard rescinding her acceptance arrived 3 weeks after the accident. I watched Jane read that letter. We were in her hospital room, and I'd been helping her with the exercises the physical therapist had assigned. She opened the envelope with shaking hands, read the contents, and then stared at the wall for 20 minutes without speaking. "Jane," I finally ventured. "Get out," she said quietly. "Please let me." "Get out," she screamed, this time loud enough that nurses came running. "I don't want you here. I don't want to see you. This is your fault. Everything is your fault." She'd been told about the drunk driver. She knew about the police report about his arrest and pending charges. The doctors had explained all of it to her in detail, but knowing the facts and accepting them were apparently two different things. I'd left her room in tears, passing Mom in the hallway. She'd looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You heard her. Stop coming to the hospital. You've done enough damage." The years after the accident were a masterclass in isolation. I'd been accepted to Michigan State on a full academic scholarship, but Mom convinced me to defer and help with Jane's recovery. 1 year became 2, then 3. By the time I finally enrolled, most of my high school friends had moved on. Jane never spoke to me unless forced. She'd look through me at family dinners, her face blank as if I were furniture. The deferment had seemed reasonable at the time. Jane needed help with basic tasks while she recovered someone to drive her to physical therapy appointments to help her up and down stairs to prepare meals when Mom was at work. "It's the least you can do," Mom said, and I'd agreed because the guilt was eating me alive. Never mind that I wasn't actually guilty of anything except being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I got a job at a local coffee shop to stay busy and contribute to household expenses. The scholarship to Michigan State was deferred but not guaranteed to be honored after a gap year. The university's financial aid office sent me a letter stating I'd need to reapply and that funding couldn't be promised for future academic years. I called them in a panic. A sympathetic advisor named Patricia explained that academic scholarships were awarded based on immediate enrollment. Since I deferred, I'd forfeited my place in that year's cohort. I could reapply as a transfer student after completing some credits elsewhere, or I could enroll as originally planned and lose the scholarship entirely if I changed my mind again. "What should I do?" I asked her, my voice breaking. "That depends on why you deferred," she said gently. "If it's a family emergency, we might be able to make an exception with proper documentation. But how could I explain that my family needed me to sacrifice my future because they decided the accident was my fault? How could I tell her that my mother had made it clear I owed Jane this time, this sacrifice, this penance for a crime I didn't commit? I ended up taking community college classes while helping Jane studying at night after she'd gone to bed. The courses were basic English composition, introductory psychology, general biology classes that transferred to almost any 4-year program and kept my mind sharp. I told myself I was being practical, building credits while being a good sister. The truth was that I was trapped. Mom had made it clear that leaving would mean permanent exile. If you abandon your sister now, she'd said, don't bother coming back. Jane's physical therapy was brutal and depressing. I drove her 3 times a week to a clinic 40 minutes away. She'd disappear into the therapy rooms for 90-minute sessions, emerging sweaty and exhausted, sometimes in tears from the pain. The therapists were kind but firm, pushing her to regain mobility in her damaged leg. I'd wait in the reception area doing homework or reading. Sometimes other family members of patients would try to make conversation. I became skilled at deflecting personal questions with vague answers that revealed nothing about the situation at home. During one of these sessions, about 8 months after the accident, another mom sat down next to me. Her daughter was recovering from a skiing accident. We made small talk about recovery timelines and insurance nightmares. Then she asked what had happened to my sister. "Car accident," I said shortly. "Were you in it too?" she asked, noticing the faded scar on my wrist where I'd had surgery to pin the fracture. "Yes, that must have been terrifying for both of you." I nodded, throat tight, unable to explain that Jane didn't speak to me anymore, that being in the accident together had somehow created an unbridgeable distance between us instead of shared trauma. Jane's recovery progressed slowly. After 6 months, she could walk without crutches, though her gait was uneven. After a year, she could climb stairs without assistance. After 18 months, she enrolled in the local community college, the same one where I was taking classes, though we carefully scheduled around each other to avoid overlap. She declared a major in marketing. It was practical, had nothing to do with dance. I once found her in the parking lot sitting in her car and crying while watching a video of herself performing the Nutcracker 3 years earlier. I'd approached cautiously intending to offer comfort, but she'd seen me and driven away without a word. By the time I finally enrolled at Michigan State 3 years late, and without my scholarship, Jane had transferred to a 4-year program downstate. She moved into an apartment near campus and stopped coming home except for major holidays. I was relieved. Living in the same house with someone who treated you like a ghost was exhausting. College was lonely for me. Most students my age were juniors or seniors by the time I arrived as a freshman. The scholarship I'd lost would have covered tuition, room, and board. Instead, I paid my own way with student loans and part-time work in the university library. I lived off campus in a rundown studio apartment and survived on ramen and bargain groceries. I studied finance because it was practical and the job market was stable. My grades were excellent, a 3.9 GPA that I maintained. Through sheer determination and long nights. I had acquaintances, but few real friends. People would invite me to parties or study groups, and I'd make excuses. The truth was that I didn't trust people anymore. The accident had taught me that even family could turn on you when things got hard. If Mom and Jane could decide I was guilty despite all evidence to the contrary, what would strangers do? I graduated with honors and immediately got a job offer from a financial firm in Detroit. The starting salary was modest but livable. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood and bought furniture from IKEA. For the first time in years, I had space that was entirely mine, where no one looked through me or blamed me for existing. I stopped going home for minor holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas only, and I'd arrive late and leave early. Jane started bringing boyfriends to these gatherings, a series of interchangeable men who seemed nice enough. She'd laugh and joke with them, a version of herself I barely recognized. Mom would seat me at the far end of the table as far from Jane as possible. Dad would try to include me in conversations, but the effort was strained. Aunt Brenda, Mom's sister, always made a point of hugging me and asking about my job, though the pity in her eyes was almost worse than Mom's coldness. Dad tried to play mediator at first, but Mom's bitterness was a tide that eventually swept everyone along. He stopped defending me around the time Jane started physical therapy. It was easier for him, I think, to have one daughter instead of two. I stayed in Michigan after college working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm in Detroit. I visited home twice a year for major holidays, sitting at the far end of the table while Jane held court about her job as a marketing director or her perfect boyfriend, Travis. Mom would serve me last almost as an afterthought. Dad would make uncomfortable small talk about weather patterns. When Jane's wedding invitation arrived, I'd stared at it for 3 days before opening it. My name was listed alone, no +1 offered. The ceremony would be in our hometown of Riverside at the same church where we'd both been baptized. I bought a plane ticket and requested time off work, knowing I'd regret going, but unable to explain to myself why I couldn't just skip it. The invitation package had been elaborate, thick cardstock with gold foil lettering, a details card, an RSVP card with a pre-stamped envelope, and a map of the venue locations. Everything screamed expensive and carefully planned. Jane had always been detail-oriented, even as a child. Her bedroom had been meticulously organized, her school projects always pristine and turned in early. Travis seemed like a good match for her. I'd met him once before briefly at a family dinner 18 months earlier. He was a civil engineer, steady and calm, with an easy smile. He tried to include me in conversation that night, asking about my work in finance. Jane had steered the discussion away from me within minutes, but I'd appreciated the attempt. The wedding invitation had arrived on a Tuesday. I'd found it in my mailbox, mixed in with bills and junk mail. My first instinct was to throw it away and pretend it never came. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity about whether I was actually wanted there, or maybe just the sad hope that this might be an olive branch. I texted Jane directly. Got the invitation. Are you sure you want me there? She'd responded 6 hours later. Mom insists on keeping up appearances. You're invited. Not yes, I want you there. Not I hope you can make it. Just a flat statement about appearances. I should have recognized the warning in those words. I'd spent a week debating whether to attend before finally clicking accept on the RSVP card. Part of me hoped that maybe the wedding would be a turning point. Weddings were supposed to be about new beginnings and family unity, right? Maybe seeing Jane happy would soften Mom's attitude. Maybe we could find a way back to being sisters again. The dress shopping had been its own ordeal. Jane had sent those 3-color options with explicit instructions: nothing too formal, nothing too casual, nothing bright. I'd gone to 5 different stores before finding the navy dress that met all her specifications. The saleswoman had been enthusiastic, talking about how beautiful the wedding would be and how special it was to have a sister getting married. I'd smiled, then agreed, and felt hollow inside. The flight to Riverside was short, just under an hour from Detroit. I'd booked a hotel room rather than staying at my parents' house. The excuse was convenience, but the reality was that I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping under the same roof as Mom's contempt. The hotel was a Holiday Inn, near the highway, clean and anonymous. I'd arrived 2 days before the rehearsal dinner to avoid seeming like I was swooping in at the last minute. The time stretched endlessly. I worked remotely from the hotel room, attended a yoga class at a nearby studio, and ate meals alone at chain restaurants. My phone stayed mostly silent, except for work emails and a few messages from colleagues wishing me a good time at the wedding. On the day of the rehearsal dinner, I changed outfits 3 times before settling on the navy dress. Too early, and I'd look desperate. Too late, and I'd seem disrespectful. I aimed for exactly on time and had succeeded, pulling into the Waterford Estate parking lot at precisely 600. The rehearsal dinner guest list included 60 people, extended family, close friends. Travis's family from Colorado. I recognized most of the faces as I entered the venue. Aunt Brenda from Mom's side waved nervously from a corner table. Cousin Michael pretended not to see me. Jane's college roommate Stephanie gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I found my assigned seat at a table near the kitchen doors, far from the head table where Jane and Travis would sit with both sets of parents. The placement felt deliberate. A couple I didn't recognize sat down next to me, introducing themselves as Travis's aunt and uncle from Denver. They were kind, asking about my flight and my job, unaware of the family dynamics that had placed me in exile. Their names were George and Linda Patterson. George owned a hardware store in Denver, and Linda taught elementary school. They were warm and chatty, excited about the wedding. Linda showed me photos of their 2 sons, both married, with kids of their own. "Are you on the bride's side or groom's side?" George asked cheerfully. "Bride's," I said. "I'm Jane's sister." Linda's face lit up. "Oh, how wonderful Jane is. Just lovely. We met her last Christmas when she and Travis came out to visit. She's so gracious and sweet. You must be so proud of her." I managed to smile. "She's worked very hard to get where she is." "And what do you do, dear?" Linda asked. "I'm a financial analyst in Detroit." "Oh, how interesting. Do you enjoy it?" I did, actually. My work was one of the few things in my life that felt clean and uncomplicated. Numbers didn't lie. Financial statements told clear stories. Market trends followed logical patterns. There was comfort in the predictability of it. We chatted pleasantly through the appetizer course bruschetta with fresh mozzarella and tomatoes. George told a funny story about a wedding disaster involving a misplaced ring and a golden retriever. Linda asked if I was seeing anyone special, and I deflected with practiced ease. Around the room, other tables buzzed with conversation. I recognized Jane's college roommate Stephanie holding court with a group of women near the windows. Cousin Michael was at a table with other relatives from Dad's side, people I'd grown up seeing at family reunions, who now barely acknowledged me. Aunt Brenda caught my eye from across the room and gave a small wave. She looked uncomfortable, trapped at a table with Mom's friends who were probably hearing all about what a burden I'd been after the accident. Aunt Brenda had tried to stay neutral over the years, but she'd been worn down by Mom's constant narrative of my guilt. The venue really was beautiful. Large windows showcased the lake, which reflected the setting sun in shades of orange and pink. White flowers, roses, hydrangeas, baby's breath covered the tables in elegant arrangements. String lights had been hung from the exposed beams, creating a warm glow as evening approached. Jane had always had good taste, and Travis apparently had the money to indulge it. I wondered what this was all costing. The venue alone probably ran $20,000. Add in the food, the bar, the flowers, the photographer currently circulating through the room, capturing candid moments. I'd heard Dad mention something about Travis's family contributing significantly to the wedding budget. His father owned a successful construction company in Colorado. I contributed nothing. Of course, I hadn't been asked to be in the wedding party. No surprise there. Jane had 5 bridesmaids, all college friends or work colleagues. Her maid of honor was Stephanie, the roommate she'd lived with for 3 years. They'd stayed close after graduation, taking girls' trips together and celebrating each other's milestones. I'd seen photos on social media. Jane had never unfriended me, though she'd long ago adjusted her settings so I couldn't comment or react to her posts, pictures of wine nights and beach vacations, and bridal showers I hadn't been invited to. Jane, laughing and carefree, surrounded by people who loved her. Dinner service began without incident. The food was excellent filet mignon with roasted vegetables, Caesar salad bread that melted in your mouth. I ate slowly, trying to enjoy the meal, while ignoring the weight of my mother's glare from across the room. She wore a burgundy dress that matched Jane's color scheme, her hair styled in perfect waves. She looked beautiful and cold. Travis's father stood to give a toast during the main course. He was a jovial man with a booming laugh, talking about how Travis had called him after the first date to say he'd met his future wife. The guests laughed and applauded. Jane blushed prettily, leaning into Travis's shoulder. They looked happy together, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Then Mom stood up. She hadn't been scheduled to speak until after dessert, according to the program sitting next to my water glass. Jane looked surprised, her smile faltering slightly as Mom tapped her fork against her champagne flute. The room quieted. "I'd like to say something while everyone's here." Mom began, her voice steady. She wasn't looking at Jane, she was looking directly at me. My throat closed. "Most of you know that our family has been through some difficult times," she continued. Jane overcame a terrible tragedy when she was 19 years old, an accident that ended her dreams of dancing professionally. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I could feel people shifting in their seats, confusion rippling through the crowd. This wasn't a typical rehearsal dinner speech. What many of you don't know is who was responsible for that accident. Mom's voice grew harder. My other daughter, sitting right there, was driving the car that night. She destroyed Jane's future. She stole everything my beautiful girl had worked for since she was 4 years old. I couldn't breathe. The silence was suffocating. I invited her tonight because Jane insisted, Mom said, her mouth twisting. But I want everyone here to understand something. She is dead to us. She has been dead to us for 13 years. Someone gasped. I think it was Aunt Brenda. Travis's mother looked horrified. Dad sat frozen, his face gray. Jane was staring at her plate. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember the walk from my table to the center of the room where I could see everyone. My legs felt disconnected from my body, moving on autopilot while my mind raced. Mom's face was flushed with righteousness. She looked triumphant, as if she'd finally said something she'd been holding back for years. Around us, 60 people waited to see what would happen next. I looked at Jane. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then I looked at my mother and asked the only question that mattered. What color was the traffic light? Mom blinked. What? The traffic light, I repeated louder. What color was it when we entered the intersection? The confusion on her face was almost comical. That's not, you were driving. You were responsible. The police report says the other driver ran a red light, I said. My voice sounded strange, too calm. He was going 60 in a 35 zone. He failed a field sobriety test. His blood alcohol content was penixtine, twice the legal limit. I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were shaking, but I managed to open my email and pull up the PDF I'd been carrying around for 13 years, the police report. I'd requested a copy when I turned 18, needing to see the truth written down in official language. The accident was ruled his fault, I continued. He served 18 months in jail for vehicular assault. His insurance paid Jane's medical bills. All of this information is public record. Mom's face had gone from flushed to pale. You were still driving. I was sober, I said. My blood test came back completely clean. Jane was the one who had been drinking. She's the reason I was driving at all. She handed me her keys because she knew she couldn't get behind the wheel. I turned to address the room. 60 faces stared back at me, various expressions of shock and discomfort painted across them. I was 17 years old, I said. I did everything right. I was the designated driver. I obeyed traffic laws. I wore my seatbelt. The light was green. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit us on Jane's side of the car. I had a concussion and a broken wrist. Jane's injuries were worse because that's where the impact occurred. It was a tragedy. It was not my fault. The silence that followed was different from before. This one felt like the moment before thunder. You never even asked me what happened, I said, looking back at Mom. You saw Jane's injuries and decided I was guilty. You made me defer college to help with her recovery. You treated me like a criminal in my own home. You erased me from family photos. You stopped celebrating my birthday. You've introduced me as the daughter who still lives in Michigan to avoid saying my name. Aunt Brenda was crying openly now. Dad had his head in his hands. I stayed quiet because I thought maybe I deserved it somehow, I said. I thought maybe if I'd been a better driver, if I'd seen the truck sooner, if I'd swerved differently. I've spent 13 years wondering if there was something I could have done differently. My voice cracked. I swallowed hard. But I was 17, Mom. I was your daughter. I was hurt too. I had nightmares for years. I still tense up at intersections. I needed you, and you abandoned me because it was easier to have someone to blame than to accept that sometimes terrible things just happen. Jane was crying. I could see her shoulders shaking even though she turned away from the room. Travis had his arm around her, looking completely lost. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. No words came out. I came tonight because I hoped maybe enough time had passed, I said. Maybe you were ready to be my mother again. Maybe Jane was ready to be my sister. But instead, you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone you know. I picked up my purse from the table. I'm done, I said. I'm done apologizing for something that wasn't my fault. I'm done being the ghost at your dinner table. I'm done waiting for you to love me again. I looked at Jane one last time. I'm sorry you got hurt. I've been sorry every single day since it happened. But I'm not sorry for surviving. And I'm not going to keep punishing myself because you need someone to blame. I walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step echoing in the horrible silence. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody called my name. I made it to my rental car before I started shaking so badly I had to sit in the parking lot for 20 minutes. My phone started buzzing before I'd even caught my breath. Aunt Brenda, cousin Michael, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off and drove back to my hotel. The wedding was scheduled for tomorrow at 2. I didn't plan to attend. I slept poorly, waking every few hours to stare at the ceiling and replay the confrontation in my mind. Part of me felt sick about making a scene. The rest of me felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying since I was 17. My phone had 43 missed calls when I turned it on the next morning. Most were from family members. 3 were from a number labeled Jane Cell. I listened to her voicemail while drinking bad hotel coffee. It's me. Her voice was thick, like she'd been crying. I know you're probably not coming tomorrow. I don't blame you. I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew it wasn't your fault. I've always known. The doctors told me what the police report said when I was in the hospital. But Mom was so angry, and it was easier to let her be angry at you than at me for drinking. I was a coward. I've been a coward for 13 years. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. I let you take the blame because I was ashamed, she continued. I ruined my own life by getting drunk and giving you my keys. You saved me from a DUI. You probably saved my life by driving. And I repaid you by pretending you didn't exist. Another pause. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I don't even know how to ask. But I needed you to know that I know the truth. I've always known. And what Mom did last night, she was wrong. I should have stopped her. I should have stopped all of it years ago. The voicemail ended. I sat on the hotel bed for a long time staring at my phone. My flight back to Detroit wasn't until Sunday evening. The wedding would be starting in 4 hours. I thought about Jane at 19, drunk and injured, watching her dreams evaporate in a hospital room. I thought about the choice she had made to let me shoulder the blame. I thought about 13 years of silence and avoidance and carefully maintained distance. Then I thought about the girl who used to practice ballet in our shared bedroom, who let me watch, even though I was the annoying little sister. The girl who taught me how to braid hair and shared her Halloween candy and defended me from bullies in elementary school. I didn't go to the wedding, but I sent a text to Jane's number. I accept your apology. I'm not ready to see you yet, but maybe someday. I hope your day is everything you wanted it to be. She responded immediately. Thank you. I'll wait as long as you need. 3 months later, I got another call from Jane. She and Travis were settled into their new apartment in Colorado Springs. Mom and Dad were going to therapy. Mom had written me a letter. Jane had a copy, if I wanted it forwarded. Would I be willing to talk on the phone sometime? I said maybe. 6 months after that, Jane flew to Detroit. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, sitting across from each other at a small table by the window. She walked with a slight limp, more pronounced than I remembered. Her face looked older, but her eyes were the same. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about the guilt she'd carried, how it had poisoned every good thing in her life, how she tried to bury it by pretending I didn't exist, how Mom's anger had become a shield she'd hidden behind, because facing the truth meant admitting she destroyed her own dreams. I told her about the loneliness the holidays spent in empty apartments, the way I trained myself not to expect anything from family, how I built a life in Michigan, specifically because it was far enough away that surprise visits were impossible. We didn't hug when she left. We didn't make promises we weren't ready to keep, but we agreed to talk again in a month. The rebuilding was slow. Some family relationships never recovered. Mom and I speak maybe 3 times a year, and the conversations are stilted and careful. Dad tries harder, but there's a distance between us that might never fully close. Aunt Brenda sends birthday cards now, and Cousin Michael invited me to his wedding last year. Jane and I talk every few weeks. She came to Detroit twice more, and I visited her in Colorado once. Travis is kind to me in a way that suggests Jane told him everything. Their daughter was born 2 years after their wedding, and they asked me to be her godmother. I said yes. The scars are still there. I still tense at intersections. I still feel a flutter of anxiety when I see Jane's name on my phone, but the weight is gone, that crushing burden of unearned guilt that I carried from 17 to 30. I didn't get my family back, not entirely. Some things once broken can't be fully repaired. But I got myself back. I got the truth acknowledged. And in the end, that had to be enough. The last time I saw Mom at a neutral family gathering Aunt Brenda organized, she pulled me aside before I left. Her face looked haggard, older than her 62 years. "I'm sorry," she said. The words sounded rusty, unpracticed. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything." I nodded. "I know. Can you forgive me?" I thought about it honestly, standing in Aunt Brenda's driveway while car doors slammed in the distance. "I'm working on it," I finally said, "but it's going to take time." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. Take all the time you need." I drove away from that gathering feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hopeful, not for a return to how things were. That family was gone, buried in the wreckage of that intersection 13 years ago. But hopeful for something new, something built on truth instead of blame. Sometimes terrible things happen. Sometimes there's no one to blame, just circumstances and bad luck and split-second timing. The drunk driver who hit us served his time and got sober, writing me a letter of apology during his stint in rehab. I never responded, but I kept the letter. I keep the police report too, not because I need to prove my innocence anymore, but as a reminder. A reminder that my truth was always true, even when no one believed it. That staying silent didn't keep the peace. It just let the lies grow deeper roots. The girl I was at 17, terrified and hurt, and so desperate to be loved, deserved better. The woman I am now knows that. And finally, after 13 years, my family is starting to understand it too. It's not the ending I would have chosen, but it's the truth. And truth I've learned is worth more than false peace.